Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 9th of July 2025. I have done a breaking news update concerning the massive strikes on Ukraine last night, we'll get to that in a short while. In the meantime, let's go to the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveat supply, of course. You can find them linked in the description below. 1,050 personnel lost is about where we've seen it the last few days. It fluctuates around the 1,000 to 1,200 mark. 5 tanks, 2 troop-carrying AFVs, so both below the daily average. A couple more tanks than we have seen, but generally below the daily average there. 68 artillery systems. Phenomenal numbers there. That's over 3 times the daily average. Incredible stats in that category again. And I often say, well, you know, what's going on there? Can we trust those numbers? And then I keep coming up with evidence to support the claims of the Ukrainians. They really are attriting a whole bunch of artillery pieces in general. In fact, I can show you this video, which is 15 Russian guns being destroyed by soldiers of the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade here. So this is just a very quick montage of what this one particular group of troops have been up to with regard to howitzers and whatnot. And you can go and multiply these attacks across the front line. There is a montage of 15 guns being taken out. Now, I have to say, it's often unclear, probably more unclear with howitzers as to what the damage is compared to something like a tank or an IFV. So, yeah, okay, this is interesting because there are spotter drones on almost all of these, I think. So you do see that there are explosions. However, you don't quite know whether that howitzer is taken out for good. In the same way that you would know if a tank is taken out for good, quite often you get the cooking off of ammunition, the turret tossing of a tank. But most of all, you get to see that tank just sit there in the middle of a field. Whereas these howitzers are hidden in tree lines where they'll remain. They've been hit by these drones, but you don't quite know whether that howitzer is fit to fire another shell. You don't know what damage is done from these explosions. Howitzers are slightly simpler pieces of kit compared to all the moving parts on a vehicle that moves. You can blow up the tires on this, for example, the wheel axle, and you're still probably going to be able to fire the gun. So these numbers, I think, indicate the number of howitzers and SPGs and even large mortars that have had explosions around them, right? That have had FPV drones hit them, generally speaking. But even in terms of counter battery fire, you know, you don't always know that these are taken out for good. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. 68 of them, though. That's a phenomenal number in the last 24 hours. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 119 vehicles of fuel tanks, a fairly decent number. They're 2 pieces of special equipment. Okay, so we looked at the montage of howitzers. Now we're going to go on to see, and I'm going to pause this because I get into trouble. This is a Russian MLRS system being hit by an FPV drone. Now, here is an example of where you know the vehicle has been taken out. There's absolutely no doubt here. You've got the FPV drone hitting it, and that is an explosion. I don't think you'll be driving that vehicle much in the future. It is, look at the scorch marks around there. I mean, that has absolutely, fundamentally disassembled itself. So, yeah, that's an MLRS taken out there, and it could be that, oh no, I think we saw, did we see MLRS yesterday on the list? I think we did. Okay, here, oh yeah, because actually I didn't show you that to you yesterday. I thought, oh, it's too big an explosion, and today I've just paused it in a way, so that was actually yesterday's video. Okay, what do we have here? So, right, that was it. The TOS one, and again, this is another one I hadn't shown you. I think this is one that came out the other day. I didn't show you, but anyway, it is a TOS one, a thermobaric launcher getting hit again. And the reason I'm showing this is because of what Max 25 adds. The Russian invaders, what General Staff say, that the Russians have lost 100 of these heavy flamethrower systems. They call them flamethrowers. They're not flamethrowers like you or I know them. You know, someone with a tank of very volatile liquid on their back, spraying out of some kind of trigger-operated mechanism, flames at enemy soldiers. No, this is a thermobaric launcher that fires off, not got a very long range, which is possibly why quite a few of them have been taken out, because they have to get fairly close to the contact line in order to fire. Generally 5 or 6 kilometer range for these, and these TOS-1A thermobaric launchers, they have been hit quite frequently. The Russian invaders have already lost 100 heavy flamethrower systems since the beginning of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine, says the General Staff. In fact, they split them into 3 different types there. If I make this a little bit larger, 3 different types. I can't read that, but they have taken out the total of 30, 54, 64, 72, 100, adding that one on as well. So, and then some other claim down there, but it says 100 at the bottom. The different styles. So, you got your TOS-1A and you got other varieties, it appears. Now, going back a few weeks, if you remember, Donetsk was hit. The city of Donetsk, there was some Storm Shadow strikes on the command of the 8th Combined Arms Army, and we are still learning about the damage that was done, or at least the elimination of Russian officer hierarchy. So Colonel Vasily Shrinevsky here, who served as head of the communication service within the command of the 8th Combined Arms Army, was eliminated as a result of the strike on occupied Donetsk on June the 30th, and no doubt others were as well, but there is one of the first named people. If I remember correctly, there might have been someone else in that strike as well. Okay, then we're going to, so that's a personnel one that should have been slightly earlier. Okay, we're going to go here to more millions going up in flames for Russia. Operators from the 15th Separate Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade, the Chorny Lis, and the 413th Raid Battalion destroyed a Book 1 Russian air defense system here. We have seen a lot of books getting destroyed over a period recently, but then last couple of weeks less so. Well, here is one getting taken out in a tree line there. I presume, well, I don't know whether that is never going to fight another day. It's very difficult to do a battle damage assessment from that, but that could well be the air defense system you see added to the list earlier in the video. Right, okay. What else do we have? So Ukrainian Su-27 of the Air Force, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, carried out a strike on a gathering site of enemy drone and personnel in Luhansk region. So again, we see the very purposeful targeting of drone operators. Here we've got a building, and then later on we have not quite such a building, as the guided glide bombs absolutely shellac that edifice with, I presume, drone operators inside, and indeed possibly drones. Okay, now Max 25 here is reporting on what the GUR say. So the military intelligence, the army of the aggressor state Russia systematically robs its own military. Okay, what we're going to talk about is a bit of attention. This was brought up to me by at least a couple of you in the threads when I last talked about how the Russian army is spending out stupendous amounts of money recruiting troops into fighting for them on the front lines, and this is costing them lots, and it is a bit of a problem for the budget. Well, actually, what I'm also reporting frequently is that the Russians aren't paying their soldiers. So you can't have both. A massive cost to the economy and routinely not paying them. Well, actually, you can sort of. It's still a massive cost, but quite often they are also not paying. But it's not as big as a cost as it could be, because quite frankly, they are not paying their soldiers nearly enough, often enough, and the full amount of what they are owed. So about 10% of servicemen of the Southern Military District do not receive financial support or do not receive it in full. So 10% in this particular district not paid at all, or only paid some of what they are owed. More than 2,500 servicemen of the Southern District do not receive financial support at all due to the lack of documents. Another about 3,000 due to the lack of bank details. So it's not too 2,500,000 is a bit of a typo there. So 2,500 did not receive support at all due to a lack of documents. Another 3,000 due to lack of bank details. So that's 5,500 supposedly because they don't have the right documentation or details. More than 20,000 people received the payments due to them in full due to the lack of relevant orders. So I think there's another typo there. So more than 20,000 people didn't receive the payments due to the lack of relevant orders. Payments to the families of more than 2,500 deceased servicemen, as well as more than 2,000 people dismissed from the ranks of the Russian armed forces, have not been issued. So the report only covers one of the 5 military districts. The southern military districts, the problems may be even deeper elsewhere or not so deep. But there we are seeing that potentially 25,500, then you've got people outside, so another 4,500, so 30,000 people effectively not getting paid what they should in that particular situation. Okay, that's according to the GUR. Right, moving on to distant strikes. So now we are going to talk about the record-breaking strikes on Ukraine. 728 drones and other drone types were sent into Ukraine. An incredible 711 drones taken out. Actually, this time mainly by electronic warfare. So I think, as I reported in my breaking news update, I found that quite significant because we have seen recently the vast majority of drones intercepted have been done by conventional means. So for that to have switched back to 415 taken out by electronic warfare, I wonder if that's because of where these have been sent. So here's your map of Ukraine, and you can see the vast majority of missiles and drones were sent at Lutsk and indeed Zhytomyr. And what that means is these drones are traveling an awful long distance to get to where they need to get to. Kiev, for example, is a very different kettle of fish to Lutsk and even to some degree Zhytomyr. So you've got to go that much further, which means I'm doing a bit of speculation here, but you might then have to rely on things like mobile phone masts and other ways to get yourself as a drone from all the way over here to Lutsk, whereas to get to a much closer Kiev, maybe you can use forms of navigation that are less easy to interfere with. So it could be that the decision to attack very deep into Ukraine, at the very west of Ukraine, obviously there's some sensitive targets here that have been aimed for, very much so. But to get that far, it appears the navigation system you use might be easier to intercept. So that has led to an almost 98% interception rate, which is staggeringly good, considering it's also a phenomenal number of drones. So not only have they pulled out the bag, the best interception rate we've seen for an awful long time, but they've done it on a night where there has been a record-breaking number of drones. Record-breaking by a significant margin, almost 200 extra drones sent last night. Just phenomenal. So 7 Iskander-K cruise missiles, not the Iskander-M ballistic, but 7 cruise missiles were sent. They were all, it seems, shot down. And then 6 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, none of those were shot down. And it appears that the Kinzhals were sent at Lutsk and Zhytomyr. In fact, the Lutsk mayor said that 7 missiles were set, 6, I think. So here we have the claim, I think, that 4 of the Kinzhals were sent and 1 Iskander-K, but actually it might well have been another one, because we don't have all the Iskander-Ks on here. Only 2 of them are mapped, so we're missing 5 Iskander-Ks there. We have all 6 Kinzhals. These fly in a straight line, I presume, because they are ballistic missiles, and even though they're air launched, they will go up into much higher into the sky and then come down, but it's kind of a straight line. Whereas with cruise missiles, they fly low to the ground and they are maneuverable, and you can fly them around obstacles and so on and so forth. So here you can see the pathway of the 2 of the cruise missiles. The same can be said of the drones as well. I mean, what's frustrating is you have corridors where the drones are flying over in huge numbers, and you would be hoping that this is where you could set out some really meaningful air defenses to stop them flying all the way over to here. I wonder how these maps are done, because here you are seeing that I presume all of these yellow drones that are sent to Lutsk are destroyed at Lutsk, because you wouldn't know if this one was destroyed here, for example, as that one is, then you wouldn't know it was getting to there. So it looks like most of the drones are destroyed where they're aimed at, where their targets are. Because otherwise you wouldn't know that some of these could be, as you can see here in Zhytomyr, they curl around. You might think, well, all of these are going to Lutsk, so that we're going to just have them ending there. But none of them seem to end their flight paths around here. There are some over here that end their flight paths in Kharkiv. That's because they're aiming at Kharkiv, and some other, I can't see what that city is, or that town, a couple at Poltava. So yeah, interesting. Maybe the ones, it's clear that you don't have 700 and something drones on here. So these are the drones that get to the final destination. It clearly doesn't show the drones that are shot down en route, essentially, or interfered with en route. So it's just me thinking out loud there, getting a grip on that map. Right, now we can see that this is a new drone record. The last 12 hours or so has shown a massive smashing of the record. Number of locationally lost drones indicates either the additional use of lure drones or simply the difficulty of tracking all targets at such a scale. But anyway, here are the numbers that you have. So not reported, lost and intercepted. Not reported, I presume, then that means they hit their target, does it? But yeah, there you go. Massive bunch of drones. And you can see that recently they've been throwing far more drones into Ukraine. But also, then you have these smaller lulls. I don't think it's a case that actually if you divided these big forays across these other days that you would get the same as before. I think it has gone up. The reports seem to indicate that they are sending more drones in, but they are also having the not very many at all and then loads as they stockpile. So it's a real up and down situation there. Right, Euromaidan Press and others reporting on the destruction that was done is not as bad as it could be, given that they've intercepted an awful lot of drones, right? But there are still some pretty striking images coming out. Zelensky talking about how this is a new large-scale attack against our cities. Intercepted drones and mobile file groups were used. Dozens of hits. Demonstration attack. And right now, when there have been so many attempts to achieve peace, to cease fire, only Russia is the one that rejects everything. Another proof is that sanctions are needed. And of course, Blumenthal and Graham are going to put their sanctions bill and secondary sanctions bill to Congress today. This is why I think Zelensky says painful sanctions against oil, which has been pumping money into Moscow's war machine for over 3 years of war. Secondary sanctions against those who buy this oil and sponsor the killings are needed. And so, yeah, I think he's appealing to the American Congress to get that bill through, because this will stop such horrific nights as last night from taking place. Now, we can see that there are places of damage, but actually the number of deaths and indeed casualties are far lower than we might expect, given the sheer volume of drones and missiles that were sent in, but particularly drones. Russia maintains its strategy of using drones and missiles in nightly strikes targeting infrastructure and civilian areas across Ukraine, including schools, hospitals and apartment buildings. Most of these attacks lack clear military objectives and appear designed to terrorize the local population, following a pattern established throughout the war. And this is a question I've been asking people in the know. I talked about this with Richard Woodruff and Tim White the other day. Like, how many of these drones do you think are actually aimed at military targets and then may get interfered with or shot down, and then they hit civilian targets, and then we think, oh, they're aiming at civilians, but they're not actually aiming at civilians? And then how many of them are actually aimed at civilians, and the general consensus is a bit of both, right? They are going to be going for military targets, and sometimes those drones and missiles get stopped from hitting the military targets, but then they end up hitting civilian targets. That's really unfortunate. But then the Russians are also terrorizing cities. I mean, we know overtly that they're doing that in Kherson. They're literally murdering civilians with FPV drones there. And they are apparently doing that to very many other places around Ukraine. Russian forces launched 728 drones and 13 missiles. Absolutely shocking, really. So the attacks triggered garage fires, a garage cooperative in Lutsk, and an industrial facility. Of course, they're not going to tell us about any military facility or indeed military industrial complexes that might be hit. I wonder if Lutsk is a place where a number of these industrial concerns are creating weapons. I don't know. It could be that that's what the Russians were trying to hit last night. According to the mayor, no fatalities were reported in the Lutsk strikes, though the assault caused significant property damage across the city. One woman's been injured in Kiev. I think there's more than one now, but I've not heard of any deaths, which is amazing. And then Zelensky, as I said, is calling for stronger sanctions. Russia was clearly preparing for this major attack, says the Euromaidan press. Massive attack followed a notably smaller Russian drone strike, and in fact a couple of nights of much smaller drone strikes that brought just a handful of drones against eastern Mykolaiv Oblast. That's the night before. Russia often scales back daily attacks for 24 to 48 hours, then unleashes everything at once. The quiet nights aren't mercy, they're preparation. Why stockpile drones? Because the mass psychological impact requires mass numbers. Yeah, I mean, it's why stockpile drones. So you stockpile drones because you want to do massive attacks. Why do you want to do massive attacks? Yes, there's a psychological impact, but actually it's overwhelming air defenses. Now, as it turns out, last night didn't overwhelm the air defenses to the degree that the Russians would have liked. And so the Ukrainians had a really good night at the office, although it is horrific. And this will expend vital interceptors and expend resources. One would hope that the Ukrainians really are ramping up interceptor drone production, which apparently they are. So a few dozen drones every night becomes routine, but 728 in one assault, that keeps entire populations awake, wondering when the next mega attack will come. I presume they'd like to do 728 every night, so they can't because they can't produce that many at the moment, but they are producing more and more. Right, those following my live posting last night, says Tim White, will know that Lutsk bore the brunt of the Russian attack, numerous missiles hitting the quiet city, which is only about 85 kilometers from the Polish border. Thankfully, no one was injured. For a change, Russia didn't try to hit civilians, is the claim, but they have hit commercial property, and there will be, I think, impact on civilian infrastructure, but no deaths or injuries, it seems, so that's amazing. Local leaders in Lutsk said private business was destroyed, and a garage cooperative was also the target of a Russian hypersonic Kinzhal missile, which did the damage. Over 50 firefighters quickly managed to stop the burning. The Lutsk region was attacked by over 50 drones and 5 missiles. It was one of just 4 locations where enemy drones or missiles hit. Another place hit was Zhytomyr, where it said a carpentry workshop was hit and 2 nearby apartment blocks damaged. And then that's the map that we saw already. So Zhytomyr is there and Lutsk is there, and then a few other places. Kiev saw a couple, Kharkiv 2, and what else? There was only 1 injury in Kiev. I think there's 2 now this morning, and a large fire near Brovary. Debris fell on a business yard in Trepukov in the Kiev region as a result of the night attack. Casualty is a 45-year-old woman who suffered a chest injury there. So, okay, and you can check out Tim White's thread throughout the day to see if other information is added to there. As we can see already, a bunch of other stuff has been added. Number of injuries has risen to 2 there. So, okay, Russian suicide drones have hit 5 military draft offices across Ukraine in the past 2 weeks. I've reported on this over the last few days. So we had Poltava, Kremenchuk, we had Vinnytsia moving their recruitment office because they're worried it is going to get hit. So they are definitely targeting, the Russians are definitely targeting recruitment offices in what Kyiv says is an attempt by Moscow to disrupt the mobilization process. So there is a sense to that. And indeed, we have now seen on Russian Shaheds, a number of them, from grateful residents, it says on this particular drone, from grateful residents to TCC. So TCCs are the military recruitment centers. So these is actually written on these drones that they are going to attack military recruitment centers, etched onto the paintwork there. So yeah, we know that that's what they're aiming for. At least in some cases. Now, we hear that just on the air defense front here, that Trump is weighing up sending Ukraine another Patriot air defense system. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. That would be fantastic if possible. You know, PAC-3s would be nice, thank you. US officials are also examining whether other countries can provide more Patriots to Kyiv. Previously, Axios reported that Trump plans to send 10 Patriot interceptor missiles. Remember, he stopped 30 going, or Hegseth, as we now find out, stopped, and Elbridge Colby stopped 30 going. Trump then said, no, we need them to go, and then has allowed 10 through. So that's still a deficit of 20 compared to where they were. Now, this comes at a time as Trump resumed weapons deliveries following a Pentagon pause that had caught parts of his own government off guard. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the halt without informing Trump, who expressed frustration that the move was not properly coordinated with the White House. This also follows Trump's disappointment with Vladimir Putin's rejection of peace talks and their recent phone call. Ukraine desperately needs more Patriots as it faces nightly Russian missile and drone attacks that target civilian infrastructure. Now, in terms of what Ukraine did last night, there's still emerging details coming out, but Moscow region was certainly struck. There was an explosion in the background to this video that was taken yesterday evening in the Moscow region. We know that Rilsk, again, this staging post for now it's the Sumy region of Ukraine, but it was where the Russians were staging to form their defense of Kursk itself. You had Rilsk and Lugov, two places that have been hit routinely since they've been attacking into Sumy. So this, I think, are still areas that are used to house command posts and troop accumulations and whatnot. So Rilsk hit again. Melitopol down in occupied Zaporizhia was hit. Explosions have been heard near the airport. Pro-Ukraine channel Supernova published and geolocated these photos showing a fire at a military airfield and claim, according to our information, a helicopter was burning. So we might see a helicopter be on the lost lists going forward. Fingers crossed. So that was in Melitopol. Then we have this, and I don't know where to include this because I don't know if it's a strike or a careless smoker. I imagine, it's either sabotage or a strike. It's in Rostov, so it's easily close enough for a strike. If you go from Berdyansk to Mariupol, keep going, you get to Taganrog and Rostov-on-Don. So that's the area we're talking about. Now we have a massive fire at a warehouse here, and that was reported on consistently throughout yesterday. The Russia on fire incident I wrote about earlier in Rostov, said Sim White, has grown and grown. Fire service says it's now under control and is not spreading, but it took many hours and 2 helicopters carrying 4,000 litres a time flying non-stop to get to this stage. As you can see here, a massive warehouse fire with explosions is raging in the Russian city of Rostov, covering an area between 2,200 and 9,100 square meters. It's not yet clear what is stored in the warehouse, but it burns nicely. So you could hear a bit of an explosion there in the middle. And actually, there are now claims that it's a warehouse with reportedly, this is Igor Sushko, not always totally accurate, but he's reporting it's 1 month worth of supply of drones was blown up in Rostov region. Now, if that's the case, wow, that would be absolutely freaking amazing if the Ukrainians could have taken out a month of drones. Now, what drones are we talking about? FPV drones or Shahed type drones or there are so many different types of drones. So anyway, it's rather vague, but that's almost certainly good news for the Ukrainians. And I imagine it would be some kind of strike or sabotage. Now, attacks on the production chain of Russian Shaheds, and you might include that Rostov burning warehouse there, I don't know. Attacks on the production chain of Russian Shaheds. The General Staff has increasingly acknowledged those attacks are aimed at damaging the production facilities of the Alabuga Special Economic Zone. So over in Tatarstan, we know the Ukrainians keep sending drones to there or thereabouts. We've also seen them attack other drone manufacturing facilities and all areas of the supply chain, I think, to those facilities. So it's definitely the case that there's an explicit effort to stop Russia being able to build and store, I guess, these drones. Totally understandable for the Ukrainians there. Okay, now onto other bits and pieces. The enemy will find no peace in Belgorod and Kursk regions. That's according to the Commander-in-Chief, General Syrsky. Took part in a meeting of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff, reported on the situation of the front, primarily in the hottest areas, in particular Pokrovsk, Liman, Novopavlivka and southern Slobozhazhchina. Just in the past 24 hours, there were 188 combat engagements with the enemy. Overall, the occupiers lost over 1,000 soldiers yesterday. I emphasise the actions of our units in active defence, preventing the enemy from advancing deep into our defensive lines in the Pokrovsk and Novopavlivka directions, and from reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. I stress the importance of restoring positions and holding territories in Russia's Kursk and Belgorod regions. We continue to pin down significant enemy force in the border area. The enemy will have no peace there. Separately, we discussed expanding and improving the drone component of our defence capabilities, both in protecting our rear cities, deterring enemy assaults along the front line, and conducting deep strike attacks on Russian territory. I'm closely monitoring the development of drone interceptor capabilities. New crews are being formed. Interceptor operators are in training. Our military needs as many of these high-tech UAVs as possible. We have full support from the President and the government on this issue. We are becoming stronger, working together for victory. Glory to Ukraine. So that's Syrsky. Now, fascinating statement from Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, saying, quote, "We will continue to support Ukraine. Let me be even clearer. The means of diplomacy have been exhausted when a criminal regime openly challenges an entire country's right to exist through military force and sets out to destroy the political order of freedom from across the continent." Just incredible. So the means of diplomacy have been exhausted. Basically says we ain't going to be able to do a peace deal with Russia at the moment, at least not until Putin changes his approach. We've exhausted our approaches. So I think this is really significant. Like, this is the arguably the main European leader now in terms of supporting Ukraine. If you see what actual equipment that Germany is getting to Ukraine on a consistent basis, they are really stepping up. And the leader is saying diplomacy's been exhausted. There's no point doing diplomacy. We just need to get as much kit to Ukraine as possible. That's how I would read that. And then in the US, we've seen the opposite direction, where it's been like, no more kit, we need to do diplomacy. But now we're starting to see Trump change his tune somewhat. And I was reporting like yesterday, you might have a situation where Trump is beginning to realize that diplomacy is not working with Putin. Putin is not in the least bit interested. Now, the CNN has reported that the Pentagon chief paused arms deliveries to Ukraine without informing the White House. So we've heard this already, but now there seems to be more and more confirmation of that. Hegseth temporarily froze American arms shipments to Ukraine last week without notifying the White House, CNN reports citing sources within the administration. The decision caused confusion in Washington, with officials scrambling to explain the situation to both Congress and the Ukrainian counterparts. Once President Trump was informed of the delay, he ordered an immediate resumption of certain deliveries, particularly Patriot missile systems. Patriot missiles. This marks the second time this year that Hegseth has unilaterally paused aid to Ukraine. Others saying it's a third time, once in February, once in May, and then just now. The incident highlights how fragile and politically vulnerable the US support mechanism for Ukraine remains, despite repeated assurances for steadfast commitment. Okay, so that tells us that it's all a bit chaotic in the White House, and that Hegseth and Elbridge Colby are able to make unilateral decisions repeatedly. They don't learn from previous mistakes. This is not good news just for the US in general. The State Department spokesman Tammy Bruce, so she's a spokesperson for the State Department, i.e. Marco Rubio, what we would call the foreign minister in the UK. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's Tammy Bruce does seem to have rhetoric that is more pro-Ukraine than many others, certainly from like Caroline Levitt. So Tammy Bruce confirms a resumption of arms supplies to Ukraine. She said, "We have been and remain the greatest supporters of Ukraine. We care about these people. We care about making sure they have what they need. We have the resumption of arms supplies to Ukraine. The president has spoken about it without going into detail about what exactly. The president is obviously very enthusiastic and committed to Ukraine's ability to defend itself. That is commitment." So she is sounding much more bullish in the US's support for Ukraine. Of course, that's just rhetoric. It doesn't really meet the words, do not meet the deeds there, shall we say. Now, Colby Babwar says, quoting from a senior GOP aide, this is coming from Politico, quote, "The president's leadership at NATO and his decision to strike Iran gave Russia and China good reason to fear America's resolve." So, China and Iran were like, oh, okay, America, we need to watch out for them. They are still, doing the business there. But the next part is important. But Elbridge Colby has just undercut the president and squandered his boss's leverage. So those that are claiming that really Elbridge Colby is really undermining the US resolve and the coherence of the administration. The Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, quote, "has made a series of rapid-fire moves that have blindsided parts of the White House and frustrated several of America's foreign allies," according to 7 people familiar with the situation. And it's actually worse than that. So Elbridge Colby, for example, has blindsided the UK previously. So this is from, not sure what paper this is from, but Shashank Joshi picks it out and says, "This illustrates the shallowness of Colby's thinking on these issues. Having a UK carrier strike group visit Asia is not leaving big gaps in European defence. As Admiral Tony Radakin said last month in Singapore, ships float and move. It would take about 6 weeks to get the carrier back." So this is the story that when the British defence team came to the Pentagon in June and spoke about the UK's decision to send an aircraft carrier to Asia on a routine deployment, Elbridge Colby interjected with a brusque comment. He basically asked them, "Is it too late to call it back?" said the person familiar with the Trump administration dynamics. "Because we don't want you there." A second person familiar with the meeting confirmed this account. The British team on the other side of the table said, "We're just shocked." The first person added, he was basically saying, "You have no business being in the Indo-Pacific." As if Elbridge Colby almost unilaterally is deciding the Indo-Pacific, and he probably is actually, because he's your China hawk, but he's deciding what ship should be in the Indo-Pacific, and what are you doing in the UK? Doing something I don't want. Well, I'm not even the president, but I don't want it. So that Elbridge Colby seems to be this person acting on his own behalf in the Pentagon there, and that is deeply concerning. Now, CNN released an exclusive 2024 audio where Trump claims he warned Putin he'd bomb Moscow if Russia invaded Ukraine. According to Trump, Putin took the threat only 10% seriously. He reportedly gave a similar warning to Xi Jinping about striking Beijing if China attacked Taiwan. Now, you can say that this is Trump, being all well, if you're a big supporter of Trump, you say he's being really strong against Putin and Xi Jinping here. But the reality is, if you cry wolf, then you are seen as redundant. Wolf, wolf, wolf. The third time you cry wolf, everyone ignores you. So if you say we're going to bomb Moscow, and then it doesn't change Putin's activities one iota, then Putin just learns that he could ignore you. Trump is a man who cries wolf. Now he's saying that even if he's taken 10% seriously, then that's good. But actually, I would argue the opposite. So part of the audio transcript is, with Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, I'm going to bomb the shit out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way. And of course, now where are we at? So he said that. He didn't come through on his threats, like he hasn't come through on the threats before the election and his inauguration, where he says, I'm going to solve this in 24 hours and I'm going to give Ukraine all the weapons they're going to need if Russia doesn't do X, Y, and Z. Russia doesn't do X, Y, and Z, and he doesn't give Ukraine any of that. And in fact, starts trying to lift sanctions on Russia, starts trying to lift aid to Ukraine, and then has his own people unilaterally deciding also to do that. And the whole thing's chaotic. And the only thing that comes out of this whole situation is Putin is emboldened. It's just a complete disaster. And they have people like Andy S yesterday, yet again, telling me that, oh, Trump's great. I told you this would happen. What, you told me this would happen? You've got this abject nonsense going on of just 6 months of appeasing Russia. Is that what you predicted? Where Ukrainians have died unnecessarily. Is that what you predicted? Well done, Trump. You've killed Ukrainians. Is that what you want? You think this guy is the savior for Ukraine? Absolute joke. Now, it's interesting that I pointed this out yesterday in my Geopolitics video, where we're talking about how Ukraine has been suffering in terms of chemical weapons being used by the Russians. This was brought up in a question in a cabinet meeting, and I pointed this out. It's really good that someone else has said the same thing, which is Trump really doesn't know what's going on, and Pete Hegseth doesn't know what's going on, to the point where when he's asked a question, he deflects it to Pete Hegseth, who then deflects it to John Ratcliffe, and John Ratcliffe doesn't even know what's going on. It's embarrassing. Chemical weapons, blah, blah, blah. He then leans over.
What does U.S. intelligence believe, and what do you believe about the use of...
So what do you believe about the use of chemical weapons in Russia, in Ukraine? John might know, John Ratcliffe. So what do you think about this? John might know. So Trump knows nothing about the subject. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, knows nothing about the use of chemical weapons in Russia. In Ukraine by Russia. John might know, John Ratcliffe, to which Trump then says... John might know Ratcliffe.
John maybe to discuss it if you'd like, John.
Ask John to discuss this maybe if you'd like. Then and I've been through this already, John Ratcliffe gives the biggest non-answer ever. None of those three people, the leader, the head of the CIA, and the president and the Secretary of Defense know anything about chemical warfare and anything about it being utilized in Ukraine by the Russians. It's just such a massive lack of knowledge here. It's terrible. That's what that shows. And indeed, this source says, in an insane moment, a reporter asked Trump about Russia's illegal use of toxic chemicals in Ukraine. Then Trump asks Hegseth, who says John might know, reflecting to John Ratcliffe to tell Trump what his own policy is. And then John Ratcliffe, all he does, he doesn't say anything about the actual use of chemicals in Ukraine. He just says, he uses a counterfactual. He says, if this is happening, then it's against the law and we know what happens then, type thing. And it's just like, you've told us nothing. All you've shown is that none of you know what's going on there. This is a complete disaster. Right, Russian economy. Hundreds of car dealers in Russia have begun to close after a collapse in car sales. About 200 have closed since the beginning of the year, approximately 5% of the total. So in 5 months, 5% of the car dealerships have closed. That's a phenomenal problem. According to Podchijenkoldin or something, another 30% of car dealerships in the country are currently in an extremely difficult financial situation and are close to ceasing operations. This has been coming for a while, says Prune. They've been trying to get help from the government, but failure seems inevitable, they say. So bad news there, as we've been reporting, so many aspects of the Russian economy are in trouble. Now, in light of the USAID funding stopping, so the US administration, Trump administration, stopped the funding of virtually every single project of US soft power around the world, right? And I've been saying that that's at a time when China and Russia are ramping up their soft power efforts. And in fact, I played you a clip from Philippa Budgie Jr. Talking about the efforts in in Africa. I'm going to be speaking to him. He's reached out. I've reached out to him. We've talked. I'm going to interview him soon. So that's cool. Russia eyes a USAID type development model to expand global influence, an official says. So this is Kyiv Independent. So, you know, the US stops all of that payment. And then Russia goes, you know what they were doing and that they've stopped doing? We should do that because it's good. So we are going to do what the US has stopped doing. This is handing the keys of power to Russia. Yevgeny Primakov, the head of Rostov, said Russia's foreign ministry is currently drafting legislation that would establish a formal framework for international development efforts. Wow. Right, the SBU has detained Chinese spies attempting to smuggle Neptune missile technology. They've detained 2 citizens of the PRC in Kiev who are attempting to illegally export classified documentation relating to the Ukrainian RK-360MC Neptune missile system. According to the investigation, one of the suspects is a 24-year-old former student at Kiev Technical University. The second suspect is his father, a Chinese national who resides in the PRC, but frequently travelled to Ukraine to personally coordinate his son's espionage activities. The former student was allegedly tasked with acquiring technical documentation related to the production of the Neptune missile system. To achieve this, he attempted to recruit a Ukrainian citizen with access to the development of advanced defense technologies. SPU intercepted the spy at the early stages of this intelligence gathering activities and caught him in flagrante delicto while receiving classified materials. Shortly after, his father was also detained while preparing to transfer the sensitive information to Chinese intelligence services. Searches conducted during the operation uncovered mobile phones containing messages and other evidence confirming the coordination of their espionage activities. Based on the collected evidence, both suspects have been officially notified of criminal charges under Part 1, Article 114 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, espionage. If convicted, they face up to 15 years in prison with the confiscation of property. Now, this is China involved in espionage, probably on behalf of Russia as well. And while we saw the Russians killing a very rare pelican, white pelican, I think, which is in the Red Book here, which is a book of endangered species. While Russian hunters are using drones to kill Red Book pelicans, Ukrainian soldiers have rescued a deer that got entangled in an anti-drone net in Prokof's direction. So I'm going to leave you with positive.
Зловили дрони, зловилося оленятко маленьке. Тікай, бігом.
Isn't that nice? And it runs away into the field. So good news there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.